welcome to J-Pod. This is a podcast on journalists and journalism. My name is Krishna Prasad and it's great to have you here. Most journalists will say changing people's lives was one of the reasons they got into the profession. Some might even remember this or that story that indeed changed a few lives. But few can claim that they actually reported a story that changed a billion lives. The demolition of the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya in 1992 was clearly such a story, when India made the big shift, a pivot if you will, from its founding principles. My guest today on J-Pod was a first-hand witness to that seminal moment. Seema Chishti, the former BBC radio journalist and Indian Express editor, was a young TV reporter when she was sent to Ayodhya for a monthly video magazine she worked for. By day's end, Seema, who had barely completed 2 years in the profession, had seen the 3 domes of a 16th century mosque come down. In this podcast, on the eve of the foundation stone being laid for a Ram temple at the very location the mosque stood, Seema discusses what it was like to see a nation change colours and what it took to cover the event. But before we get into that conversation, here's how Karan Thapar introduced an eyewitness reporting 28 years ago for the video magazine Eyewitness.
The details of what actually happened in Ayodhya on December 6th. Seema Chishti and the eyewitness crew were there. They braved the wrath of the Karsevaks as the mood switched from defiance to frenzy and then madness.
Just before 10:30, Advani and Joshi arrived, escorted by Katiyar and Singhal. They circled the area before being taken to the Ramkatha Kunj, trailed by hundreds of supporters. This was the point when the crowd seemed to go out of control. About 11:45, a group of conspicuous men with yellow bands on their foreheads ran in a single file towards the besieged policemen. Serious trouble started at 11:55 when stones were hurled at the masjid. Both the UP police and the CRPF vanished. What followed was a massive and sudden movement into the masjid, and I could see the Karsevaks make their way straight to the top with no resistance at all from the security forces. This is what followed. The first dome collapsed at about 2 o'clock. The second dome fell at 3:30. At this time, I could see Vinay Katiyar and Ramchandra Paramhans on top of the Ramkatha Kunj, giving a cricket-like commentary and egging people on. The third and final dome fell at 4:55 to loud cheers.
The 3 domes were levelled within 5 hours. Though passions were running high and the crowds uncontrollable, it was obviously premeditated by some people. The question now is, who exactly masterminded the whole show?
There is ample evidence to suggest planning. First, there is the swiftness and simultaneity of the operations. This suggests strategy rather than spontaneity. In just 5 hours, the domes were smashed, the press hit in order to ensure no coverage, and Muslim houses burnt to the ground.
Seema Chishti, namaskara.
Namaskara, Hegidira.
First class. It's a real pleasure to have as fabulous a voice as yours join us on this podcast. And I thank you so much for making the time for J-Pod, and I trust you're doing well.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege to be on your show. I'm a fan and I follow it regularly. And thank you for thinking of me, Krishna Prasad.
Thank you, Seema. We are speaking a day before the foundation stone is laid for the Ram temple in Ayodhya. And 28 years ago, you were an eyewitness in more ways than one when the Babri Masjid was destroyed and brought down by so called car sevaks belonging to the RSS and VHP and Bajrang Dal and so on. What are your feelings as you see this unfold? Did you think a day would come when the RSS, which was banned after the demolition of the mosque, would be presiding over the construction of the temple as we speak?
Uh, Not really, no. So it's a long hoop, and one can see the arc. I don't know if this is the closure to or the natural culmination of a process that's happened then, and is it drawing a line under it? But what is clear is that it is certainly of the end of a very, very troubled part of India's journey, which started on the 6th of December 1992, and the beginning of something new. I don't see it as closure or as a settlement, but it's certainly, I get the feeling of of watching another milestone develop.
In 1992, India was just 1 year into the economic reforms launched by the Narasimha Rao government. There was no satellite TV, there were no private news channels, there was no internet. CDs and DVDs were not in much use. In fact, you went to Ayodhya Seema for a monthly video magazine called Eyewitness, which was published by the Hindustan Times Group and which was hosted by Karan Thapa and issued on VHS tapes. I think you really need to explain to this new world that assignment and the experience, in some detail actually.
Yeah, you really set the scene very well on that. It was the era of the VHS, the video home service, and the cassette recorder. I don't even know if many children born in the 21st century would be able to even imagine what that meant, but that was our world. It was also the world which was evident in Ayodhya as we went, because a lot of the propaganda or the WhatsApp messages that you now see, which are directed, targeted, and sharp, were happening through messaging that went out through the cassettes, which were available on little shops there. So it was a very different world, as you put it. Now, I cannot exactly recall if the newspapers had turned pink, but it was clear that the the newsmen and newspersons' salaries had started rising. There were the three huge fault lines which still now dominate large parts of the India story, whether it was the Mandal Rath Yatra, which brought caste to the forefront in a very violent and disruptive way, in North India at least. There was the Mandir event, the Rath Yatra, etc., and the economic liberalization, the economic turmoil. So I think with caste, religion, and the economy, India was kind of giving birth to various heads and hands and events. It was certainly a very exciting place to be in, and you could kind of sense the electricity and the thrill in the air. So it was a somewhat perverse thrill as well, but people were still starry eyed about liberalization, slightly unsettled. But there was a crack appearing. What that crack would reveal was still not fully known. I remember that as far as media went, there was just BBC was visible, but BBC, just the world edition was. There was really no satellite or cable TV in that sense. And I think even the day that the Ram Mandir, the Babri Masjid was demolished, I think 7 seconds of it was shown on the BBC, and that itself caused a lot of consternation in Narasimha Rao's world. So yes, it was a very different world. I think the process of getting rid of the economy reporters in newspapers had perhaps started, and the economy page was rechristened the business page. So a lot of other things like that were clearly beginning to happen. And yes, it was a very, very different time.
How did you land this assignment? I'm very curious because I'm curious to know how you landed up doing this story and how you landed up in Ayodhya and what really went on.
On that day. Yeah, good one. So, as you said, we were working with Karan Thapar, who was the executive producer and editor. And we would have these meetings where it was a monthly news magazine, i.e., it is some kind of proto TV, if you like. So, like you have Frontline, you have India Today, you actually had the idea of a video magazine that would be mailed out and made available to read to viewers. You'd insert it in your VHS chess player, and the month's stories would kind of come out. So it was analytical. It was not very breaking news, but it was interviewee. It was maybe because we had time to be a little more thoughtful about it. So stories were planned in advance. So at the news meeting, it was decided that I would be sent to Ayodhya. I think I was the youngest correspondent of the four of us, but I think I had this fluency with Hindi, which kind of landed me a lot of assignments in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. So I had been to Ayodhya earlier as well on assignment with Eyewitness. So there was a feeling that there'd be some sort of construction and in violation of the court orders. So a team of four was actually sent out, and I was a correspondent leading the team, as it were, to find out what is it that so many people assembling, and we were told almost more than 100,000 were set to assemble. What would happen? Would there be construction? Would there be a symbolic construction? Something was up, we were told, and I was sent to cover it.
You landed up how many days before the assignment?
We landed up, I think, 3 days before the assignment to just get a hotel in time, to find out what is going on, to collect footage, mood footage, speak to people, get passes done, talk to the DM, see what the police was thinking about. And we had Newstrack, which is a competitor, which was the India Today group's video news. And there was us. And there were a lot of foreign journalists, of course. I remember Mark Tully, the BBC team, people who became friends later. But at that time, we were completely in awe of them. There were foreign agencies, and there was PTI, of course. And there would just be one or two sort of phone lines, Faizabad and Ayodhya. They were relatively small towns. There were two small hotels, Shane Awadh and Tirupati, which were where all journalists would stay. So yes, it was the days and times of bread anda in the morning and rushing and being able to hear what was happening in the room next to you. And I remember a very senior journalist couple, they had actually got their, one of them, both of them are active journalists till date. Their young daughter, because they could not leave her behind, was with us. So the hotel staff would look after the little girl as we all set out to Ayodhya from Faizabad.
Fantastic. Seema, as we discussed a couple of days back, more than half, in fact, more than 50% of today's population was not born when this life-changing event took place in India's history. In fact, a great majority of our own profession, I think, would have been very, very young in this profession at that time. I think you should lay out for them and for us and for me the 5 or 6 things that young Indians really ought to know about this whole campaign of Ram Janmabhoomi, the whole thing in 1992, if you can place in perspective somewhat. 5 or 6 or 7 things which come to mind.
Okay, I can immediately think of about 3 things in terms of what was very, very significant about it. Some of it I discussed a little before, Krishna Prasad, so I will not repeat it, but just very quickly recap that it was a huge fault line in Indian society, the whole religion line. I mean, students, you don't have to be a student of history to know that events in 1947 were very traumatic when the subcontinent experienced the biggest ever migration on grounds of religion that took place on India's eastern and western border. And India kind of stood like a beacon in that in South Asia. It was truly the exception which defined nationalism to be above that of your ethnicity, color, caste, creed. It was a huge thing. And I think one could imagine just very few countries in the world that thought of nationalism like that. This is a time just shortly after the Second World War when Europe has been riven by nationalism, which means a very specific, narrow identity thing. So in that context, for India to have adopted a nationalism which allowed the majority of Muslims in the subcontinent to comfortably pick India and not go to Pakistan, either to Bangladesh, what was to become Bangladesh, East Pakistan, or West Pakistan. There was always this confidence that whatever there were communal rights, there were also discrimination. You could sense a difference. Everything wasn't hunky-dory. But there was the promise of everyone being equal. What 1992 does is it's not so much about God alone. It's not so much about a place of worship. It's the ability of a political campaign, masterfully led by Lal Krishna Advani, but along with him, many other senior leaders of the BJP, a young party then, it's only 12 years old. But they were able to wed the idea of being a citizen with your faith.
Yeah.
So that I think was the more than the destruction of a 16th century mosque. What was destroyed or certainly chinked and damaged was the idea of nationhood, a sense of belonging. A whole lot of a generation of non-Hindu Indians, Muslims, to put it bluntly, had grown up without the shadow of Pakistan. They just had maybe cousins or second cousins, no real connect with Pakistan. So that was kind of washed off. I mean, the Tebet test, if you like, about who do you cheer for in a cricket match, that was completely washed off by that time, by the 90s, one would have thought. But it was replaced by this other fault line, very, shall we say, masterfully kind of the line of blood was drawn in the country again through this Rath Yatra. So that was, I think, the broad backdrop of what was happening emotionally. Physically, it led to a lot of bloodshed. What people forget, that this was not a kind of a very calm transition or a very coolly happening event. It is something which really took its toll. The Rath Yatra, which took more than 6,000 kilometers, it went over 8 states, and the Rath Yatra happened 2 years before the masjid was demolished, already kind of extracted its toll in terms of just the bloodshed. A new generation awaking to the difference which it thought it had buried. The ghosts of partition kind of came alive. The slogans, the name calling, and the differentiation was something that really rankled. It made life difficult for India. And number 3, I think it took away vital energy that a young country, if you'll see that we're just about beginning to reap advantages of a demographic dividend, which would have happened. But India again suffers a setback because a lot of questions, we should have been talking numbers, talking about public health, talking about education, but it all got kind of snowed under or got underlined by large identity divisions, because you had a whole lot of young people being deployed in the service of deepening this difference. And in terms of politics or the overt political consequences that you had, the 1992 event become some kind of a marker in politics that for a long time, and well till the UPA was formed, the United Progressive Alliance in 2004, the dividing line was, are you BJP or are you not BJP? So it left its mark in politics in ways where we should perhaps have shunned it, and India got an opportunity to grow out of it. But I think that the crack which we thought was light was actually something else, and we kind of fell through it.
Yeah, of course, in the run-up to this incident, in the run-up to the Rath Yatra, were 2 or 3 other very significant events. In fact, under the Rajiv Gandhi government of the Congress, the ban on the satanic verses, the Shah Bano judgment, the opening of the locks, etc. Right? There were also these 2, 3, 4 things which added to the momentum of the Rath Yatra.
Completely. And I think there was a time when I think Rajiv Gandhi's government, which was on a very heady majority, it was the promise of modernity, etc. And we can credit Rajiv Gandhi's government with the computer and all that. But what I think it did in its either confusion or its inability to truly understand the implications of what they were doing, whether it was opening the locks, which is what that government did, of opening up the whole issue, sort of enlivening it, as it were, lighting the spark, and then going and doing what was done with Shah Bano, or giving kind of adding fuel to the fire of a Hindu grievance or a wounded majority that Rajiv Gandhi did. And he actually starts his campaign in his election by talking and invoking the Ram Rajya. So of course we must understand that there is a difference between talking about welfare of a community and about heading a completely anti-platform. But it certainly kind of laid the ground for that. And you had his deputy home minister sitting in for a shilanyas or a foundation laying ceremony that happens under his watch. Brief flirtations with the VHP when the VHP was still kind of undecided about whether it should cast its lot with fully with the new party, which was the BJP, just 7 years old then in 87, or should it go along with the Congress? So yes, there was much water had flowed under the bridge before Mr. Advani got onto the Toyota Rath.
Yeah. In fact, one other thing, since we are on a media podcast, I think on a side note, we must discuss the fact that, in 1987, the Rajiv Gandhi government actually allowed the broadcast of the television serial Ramayana, which, according to the media scholar Arvind Rajgopal, played a
Yes.
key role in priming the nation's consciousness for this movement.
Correct. It certainly did. Though I sometimes wonder if this is the advantage of hindsight.
Yeah.
Is it the benefit of hindsight that we can? So because I see nothing wrong, you go ahead and you do a Ramayan serial, sure, but there was a lot of other good stuff that could have been utilized in that moment of opening out, technologically speaking, which should have been actually pushed in the progressive cause. It was not enough to kind of say that we're centrists and we completely bat for a certain kind of technology which is devoid of ideas and ideology, and that should have been fully harnessed. So while the PCO revolution happens and things are opening up, and you actually have a kind of a precursor to liberalization, which is finally put in place by Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh in the 90s. But you see signs and glimmerings of that in Rajiv Gandhi's plan. But that could have been plowed better. And even if he had to make overtures towards what he thought was an injured Hindu consciousness, there were smarter ways of doing it, because it certainly didn't help the Congress after that. The Congress party has never been able to get a majority after its 1984 majority on its own in India.
Yeah. How long and how many years were you into the profession when you went to Ayodhya at that time?
I was writing for the Hindustan Times magazine from second year, but I think that was more by way of writing things and all that. But I formally started working only in 1990, so I think I was two years and a month down.
The reason I ask you that is because when I look at the video, that long 2.5 hour YouTube video of that eyewitness show, in your voice, you can sense a great amount of anguish, a great amount of concern. That's really remarkable, for someone so young in the profession at that time.
Yeah, you could say that I was kind of shaken because I could understand what was happening and unfolding. So I guess I was quite shaken by what had happened. And I personally I have a lot of attachment with Ayodhya, and I had been there in better times, peaceful times, where every house had a little temple, and you'd be dragged into these beautiful Haveli-like homes with people saying, "Didi, come here," because this is where the Ram temple is. So it was a place with it's famous in Hindi, Braj, Urdu poetry also as having the most spectacular evenings. So, the Shame Awadh or the, Ayodhya's evenings are as famous as the Banaras mornings are. So, the skyline is mesmerizing. So there was something very magical and coming together. And on a personal note, I had a mixed parentage of a Hindu and a Muslim parentage. So for me, I used to be teased by my colleagues also. So Ayodhya for me was a point, it should not have been a point of rupture. It should have been a point of coming together. So I always had this special affinity with something which was part mosque, part temple. Um, Yes, so I think yes, there was something personal also of interest for me in that way. Yeah, maybe that did come across into my voice.
Yeah, it very much did. Another woman journalist, Ruchira Gupta, who was 24 at that time,
Yeah,
has written about how she was molested by the car sevaks on December 6, 1992.
yeah.
She, in fact, goes to LK Advani to ask him to announce on the microphone that journalists should not be attacked. But Mr. Advani apparently said, "Forget what has happened. This is a historic day. Celebrate, eat something sweet, etc." And you yourself, Seema, apparently took refuge from the mob in a sweet shop. I want to
Yes.
know, and I believe you're in touch with the sweet shop owner as we speak. But I just want to know from you, how were journalists in general and women journalists in particular treated at that time? I'm very curious because I think this is a kind of a dark period, for Indian journalism. In fact, the beginning of the dark period, if you ask me, after the emergency.
Correct. I was not with Ruchira. Ruchira is a friend. I know her. I was not there at that time. And if she spoke to Advani, then I think she went to the Ram Katha Kunj where all the leaders were standing and almost watching the masjid come down at a safe distance, but surely within viewing distance. Um, well, clearly, my experience when journalists were attacked and women, there were few women journalists, and there are many more women reporters now. But at that time, they were there, but far fewer. They didn't seem to be interested in kind of whether I was a woman or a man. It was a very clear kind of attempt at ensuring. So I had a still camera as well, which I was carrying for my own records, and I was carrying some empty tapes, video beta tapes for the help of my team. Just carrying empty ones. Should they get over, then I can give them one, because those tapes lasted just 20 minutes if I remember correctly. So they were more interested in ensuring that I was not in a position to record events. So to get me out of there, to sort of immobilize me and get me out of there. So almost kind of destroy the camera, stop this, don't take this video. And we have that sadhu telling us to do not picture this. So they didn't want evidence of this. And they just asked us to basically vamoose, go away and hit you enough so that you're totally distracted. You're at sea. But of course, we realized that this attack was on, and we were standing out in our clothes and our cosmopolitan journalist kit, and also we had cameras, and we had sling bags, and we looked a particular way with shoes and jeans, etc. So we rushed out, and then there is a place called Manas Bhavan, which is outside the parisar, the place where the parikrama, etc., was meant to take place, or the puja place where people were standing. So just a little off that, and I was actually in the basement of that place with 3 or 4 people, and there was a wonderful Bengali sweet house man who was at the basement, and he was also camping there. He just said, "You just keep quiet." He gestured to me, spoke very little, and said, "Just go into that little corner." And I remember I had my transistor set with me. I would always walk with that. Those are pre-satellite TV days and pre-phone days. And I remember listening to the AIR news there continuously, and reports and the Hindi news clearly saying, "Chut put." कहते क्षति पहुंची है, छुटपुट क्षति पहुंची है, and we could hear the wailing, the yelling. We would periodically sometimes go out after an hour or so, go out for a little while and come away, and there was it was surrounded by dust, and people who tell you that one dome has fallen, the second dome has fallen, and finally, because it was winter months, darkness set in earlier, around 5:30 or so, the third dome also fell, and it was much later that the violence subsided. And then the CRPF or some sort of central force took all journalists. The majority of journalists were in a nearby building called Sita Rasoi, which was also demolished later, which was Sita Rasoi, is meant to be Sita's kitchen. They were all there. Mark Tully was there. Ramdat Tripathi was there. Another AFP photographer was there. Several other journalists. Rakesh Sinha of the Indian Express was there. They were all there. And we were all put in these big trucks and taken back to our hotels in Faizabad, where we had to make calls. So a lot of people were trying to fax their stories, some trying to dictate it, and the CTO, or the Central Telegraph Office, was closed by then. So everything had to be done on a single, or I think 2 phone lines, or PCOs were open. So we queued up and told our respective bosses. I was in a monthly video news magazine, but I thought I must inform Karan Thapar of what was going on. And when my turn came, he was just not in a position to even absorb the hugeness of what I was telling him. And then I realized how Delhi was not aware of what was even going on. We had no idea what was going on.
I'm so happy that you use acronyms like CTO, because I think a whole lot of people wouldn't know that it stood for the Central Telegraph Office and so on.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. Yes.
That's really the magic of this time, and the camaraderie among the journalists at that time, the sharing of one phone booth or one fax machine is something really alien to most journalists of this era.
Yes, correct. And for what I take pride in, Krishna, is that a whole lot of journalists had to be beaten up in order to stop them from telling the story. So when we now see many years down that line, there's so much of technology, there's so many tools we have. But when there is so much of kind of refusal to really shape your story or to say it as it is, at least then it took sticks and stones and, a lot of thwacking and thumping for us to be shut up. So, yeah, I think we're proud of that. And it's not as if everybody was of one particular persuasion or anything. There were all kinds of, journalists in a group there. But this is clearly a case of vandalism. We were watching what we knew was a momentous, terrifying, huge event. And we wanted to be around to tell that story and to bear witness to it.
Fantastic. Kushwant Singh, who actually signed Mr. Advani's nomination papers in 1984, Mr. Kushwant Singh actually eventually revised his opinion of Advani after his demolition. He described Advani as the man, quote unquote, who sowed the dragon seeds of hatred. Would you agree, Seema, that the current mood in this country, the current Islamophobia you see in this country, was made mainstream by the likes of Advani and his cheerleaders in the media?
Yes, I would say that it contributed hugely significantly. I think this whole Islamophobia or this demand for a Hindu nation, that if Pakistan is Muslim, why isn't India Hindu? This seed has been there, as you know very well. This kind of, predates even the independent India. It's a 20s phenomenon, clearly articulated 20s phenomenon. So I think Advani is like a very proud bearer of that, and his ability to modernize it, his ability to render it kosher, to render it welcome, and of course his stint perhaps as the INB minister at a crucial time in the 70s when India sees its first non-Congress government is also interesting and important. But so yes, I mean I think he played a signature role. If I was a BJP supporter, I would say that. But if I'm a supporter of media and of secular India, then I would say that he played a huge part in dealing a savage blow to the idea that India belongs to everybody.
Well, it's such a refreshing thing to hear this because this is not what you hear anymore. And in fact, watching that 2.5 hour episode of Eyewitness, which is still available on YouTube as we speak, it's educative because it shows what good television truly is and what television could have been compared to the cesspool it's now become. And I was looking closely at some of those captions, during the show, and it's amazing to see that, back in 1992, television and the video magazine with Eyewitness was of such caliber that he could still ask questions like, is this true Hinduism? I can hear the Naib Imam actually, say secularism is dead. These are things that have really vanished out of our dictionary, right?
Correct. And I think that is a whole tragedy, Krishna, of new India versus a modern India. So, new India, this may be. Modern India, it certainly isn't. So I was also struck. My then boss Karan Thapar is interviewing the Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, who's he's in a tough spot. That almost kind of felled his career. He had difficulty in kind of recovering from there. It was a very odd thing. He's a Congress Prime Minister who's presided over the demise of the Babri Masjid, but he makes himself available for a detailed interview. He's sitting there and taking answers from a very combative Karan. We want a political establishment which does that. They have to be open for questions. So yes, there are signs of not just professional polish and professional stuff there, but in terms of just the whole operating system, if you know what I mean, was a particular way. And what we're looking at is not just a collapse of the tools of the trade, but I think the whole manual has gone kaput.
But for you in particular, it's spectacular because you've been in television, you've done a fantastic career in radio, and of course, a very long career in print. So I think you got a really 360-degree view of how this profession has really been turned on its head.
You could call it I actually call it the inverted kind of. I've taken a slow march down the technology curve. I start with TV, I go to radio, and then to print. So I'm headed, I think, to oral journalism or maybe stone tablets very soon. So, well, yeah. So I kind of, I was in like odd mediums and strange mediums at different various times. So I saw that. And we used to actually lament TV or rather video journalism when we were in it, because there was a phase when video news magazines also were asking people ki aapka nada kyun dikh raha hai kind of thing. So even those things were like we were very, concerned about that. But little did we know that we would be walking into a complete cesspool of just hate-driven debates, replacing any consideration for even data. Forget about facts and knowledge being a part of a TV diet.
But then you are eyewitness in 1992 to perhaps the most defining moment in India's post-independence history. Praveen Jain, the photographer who was then with the Pioneer and who shot some extraordinary pictures, has described attending a camp on the day before, which was December 5th, where the car sevaks were apparently being trained to pull down the domes. Seema, did you get a chance to see things like these?
No, actually, I didn't, because Praveen did this spectacular work in Madhya Pradesh, and he has these crystal clear images which have played a huge role in unearthing the conspiracy and making it quite clear that this certainly wasn't a act of wanton grievance on the part of the mob, and there was clearly a direction here. We just heard on the night before, we heard things like huge sariyas. We could hear huge metallic sounds, etc., when we just went to the site the night before. But we ignored it. So I unfortunately was not privy to much stuff then. And I think we kind of fitted the stuff which we even heard, and it's there in the story as we record it. We have people telling us that just wait till 12 o'clock. We'll all go inside and damage it. But we were maybe just so unconcerned about the mosque because we knew that is guarded by the CRPF. You're meant to be doing your temple number here. You're doing some construction here. Tell me about it. So I actually find myself cutting short people who are random people who are telling me that no, we're going to go inside there. Just wait. And actually, bang at 12, there is a chosen set of bunch of people who go in and bring down the three domes. So unfortunately, no, I did not view it in the spectacular detail that Praveen Jain does, and it's very commendable work that he is proud of, rightly so, and that he has kept. He's also deposed. The bunch of us have deposed in the Liberhan Commission that was set up, which went on for decades, and in various trials. The trial, which is still not complete, even as the foundation stone for the Ram Temple is due to be laid.
But what was it like for eyewitnesses like you to see this trial into the demolition drag on, and then to see the Supreme Court judgment? And I believe even now there's a very deliberate attempt to discredit some of the photo and video evidence. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean that was to be expected by those who are in the dock, which include big leaders and some smaller fish as well. So that is to be expected as part of any defense that is par for the course. But to see the prosecution behave in a particular way can be slightly unsettling. And we saw it through several governments. But there was either disregard, or there was either, maybe the Congress didn't want to awaken a sleeping beast. It didn't really have clear ideological answers for. And the BJP, of course, I mean, Mr. Lalkrishna Advani was Deputy Home Minister, and he was the person where the buck stops. When all this was when charge sheets were being framed, charges were being framed, and a lot of stuff was going on. So yeah, the Liberhan Commission, for instance, was set up. A single man commission was set up for 3 months, but maybe because of non-cooperation by the state government, by the center, it just dragged on, and I think got over because actually the Indian Express, my then colleague Manish Chibbar, broke the story. He put out the findings out, and they were forced to reveal it in Parliament, perhaps as a consequence of him breaking the story. And that was many, many moons later. So it's quite depressing. But I think that is, of course, part of it was because it was the Babri Masjid, the demolition matter. But there are a lot of Indians who are awaiting justice, and it isn't always what it seems. The verdict in November 2019, of course, is another kettle of fish, and I think that will probably take another program. But interestingly, even that verdict, even though it awards and the entire site to one side, it does not even think in terms of a Ganga Jamni solution, which I found astounding about it, that it could have at least spoken of a symbolic presence which acknowledges how India is a mixed bag of jelly beans. But there was no attempt to acknowledge that. But even that judgment, which goes so far as to make this foundation laying possible under the tutelage of the government, under government supervision, even that found it very difficult to deny the vandalism, the egregious nature of how events unfolded on the 6th of December 1992. So I think even a judgment like that found it impossible to not condemn the the demolition of the Babri Masjid and the way it was done and the way it was linked to nationhood, pride, and the beginning of the exclusionary nationhood that I think the Citizenship Amendment Act finally calls much loudly. That certainly was a dog whistle, and this may be the culmination of it.
Yeah, very good. Back in 92, when the mosque was demolished, English media was seen to be a bit of an outlier. I remember there were front page editorials on the destruction of the idea of India, etc., etc. And the English media was generally seen to be, seen to be out of touch with real India in the eyes of the BJP and its followers. And even after 2002, when Narendra Modi spurned English media outlets because they were seen as too liberal for the Hindutva cause, this seemed to be quite the trend. But now, with this broad sweep of time, do you get a sense that English media is now very much a part of the majoritarian project, very much a part of this bandwagon for a Hindu Rashtra?
Very, very clearly so, Krishna Prasad, and I think we can see that. So I think very soon, and that will be very evident, it's already, the criticism is in muted tones, and I imagine what this media would write if a similar event was to unfold now. I think it would be reported, but maybe on page 8. There is an understanding, it could be because of ideological, feelings of proprietors of newspapers, of editors. It's likely that India has shifted, so they actually believe that. Number 2, there is a sense that the market is there. So they think that, like television thinks, that the audience it's going out to believes that way. That's the majority, so I cater to it. So there's a change in their perception. And number 3, I think this is a government which kind of takes media very seriously. And it takes any transgression or the airing of the other side very, very seriously. And it comes down hard. Phone calls are made. It makes it very clear it doesn't brook any insubordination. So for people who have things to hide, maybe, if media houses have been been a little comfortable with things that they've done, they can be, I mean, if the government wants to get you, they'll go after you for a parking ticket. So when you have things like that, perhaps to hide, you're ideologically inclined. And number 3, you say there are millions shouting a particular name, they're shouting a particular leader's name. Who am I, a small journalist, to stand out against the crowd? So you do the number 2. I certainly see English media pretty much going down that route. It may still try and be muted about it, but I think it's a question of months, if not weeks, that it will be pretty much in sync with not just language media, but with television.
In the last couple of days, the BJP MP Subramaniam Swamy has said Narendra Modi had no role in the Ayodhya movement. Although I have seen pictures of Mr. Modi in the Rath Yatra with Mr. Advani. Seema, did you ever see him in Ayodhya?
No, I didn't. Really racking my brains and trying to remember if I saw Mr. Modi there. But no, unfortunately, I did not see him when he was there.
To draw a continuum from there to here, do you think Modi would have been PM had the Babri Masjid not been demolished?
I think he stands on the tall shoulders of Mr. Advani. There is no doubt about that.
And what do you think in retrospect with Mr. Advani not being physically present in Ayodhya on the 5th? What do you think of that?
I think it's kind of one of piece with the way the BJP has gone, and they want to make it very clear that this is truly new India. So it's not just junking the Nehruvian India, it's junking those people of the BJP, however senior they may have been, however seminal and important in the cause, because they were still functioning in the Nehruvian India. This is a project which will scrub it. So I think all memories of even a demolished Ayodhya mosque are not necessary, are not welcome. So it's actually going to be brand new. It's kind of an ab initio thing. It's pretty much like how the Lutyens, the entire Central Vista, that the complex has to be destroyed completely to build something new. So I think it's one of piece of that. I'm not surprised.
Hmm. You mentioned the Narasimha Rao interview with Karan Thapa, but to flip that thing on the other side, the really interesting part of that 1992 Eyewitness episode is that Narasimha Rao found time for Karan Thapa exactly 4 days after the demolition, and he spends 20 minutes with the television anchor. It just seems unthinkable today in the context of modern media.
Yes, that's also true that, media is it's seemingly not required anymore by people who are by popular leaders, because they say we will directly talk to our constituents, or we will directly put out press releases. We don't need you to mediate. Yes, that's true that that was precious time being spent. And in fact, I think he was not making time. Narasimha Rao does not make time to meet anybody because he said, I will do it all after Sankranti. I remember that vividly, that I'll do it after the 13th of January. And there were a lot of people, I think Shabana Azmi and a bunch of other people were trying to meet him, to talk to him. And he said, hold on, I'll meet you after Sankranti. So, yeah, I mean, Mr. Narasimha Rao was a very interesting, strange man. And I think they were among the most momentous and difficult days of his prime ministership.
And he handled it very well, I thought, despite the
He
tension
did,
of the
he did.
moment.
Yes, and he sort of comes alive and he's taking on Karan Thapar. He's letting Karan Thapar fully have his say and interrupting him and insisting on having his say in return. So quite
Yeah,
a feisty interview that is. Old
quite feisty.
times.
And on the other hand, the other thing which I noticed from that episode is the vox pop. Even public opinion on the demolition was decidedly more sober and more sane than it seems today. I mean, there seems to be a genuine feeling of loss. There is some empathy for what's happened. And all of that is quite unlike today when social media just seems to have completely coarsened the discourse.
That's a very interesting observation. You're right, actually. The vox pops at that time were, uh, even though we were as bad as any reporter. I think we were all sticking this ugly black boom and sort of asking for comments. But yes, people were more thoughtful. But I think it was a completely different era where maybe they felt jubilant, but they guarded that. There was a different kind of poise. There was a different sense of what is to be conveyed. There was not so maybe not so much visible anger and anxiety to air and bear all in a very sharp yes or no way. So you can see the ambiguity in what a lot of people are speaking to in that random market in Delhi.
Hmm. But all of that has just gone out of the window just now.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, I think it went, and it's what we're watching now. I think is truly the kind of the a flag being put, put there. So the ground had been cleared. This has all been happening, but I think now it's just sort of just stating that very clearly, underlining that very clearly.
Hmm. So let's come to the last couple of questions, Seema. Seema,
Yes.
you have tracked Urdu media for a very long time now. What is the mood just now on the eve of this foundation stone laying ceremony? Is one thing I would like to ask you. And the other thing is there any anger among Muslims, or has the community really been badgered into submission by all these decisions of the judiciary and the executive?
It's very difficult to kind of. I'll come to the second part of your question later. I think from the first part, Urdu media has seen a huge amount of consolidation in the past couple of years. So, a lot of papers, Inqilab, Sahara, all of them have been kind of also been noted. So, they've been bought by major Hindi, Jagran owns
Yeah.
some papers. So all of that consolidation has happened. So the kind of niche role or the quirky view that the Urdu press gave you is perhaps diluted. It's got more mainstreamed. They pick up a lot of content now from papers. They share columnists. So a lot of voices that you read in the Urdu papers are
Mm.
voices that you can read in English too. You can find those voices there. But I mean, the Urdu press soldiers on. It does cater to. It is kind of angry. It's cynical sometimes. It takes resort to poetry. They're bitter as well. They're always hopeful. That's something I think is the Indian condition and the Indian Muslim condition, because I think they're not going anywhere. They're very clear that they're rooted in this land. So there is a certain amount of bewilderment. That bewilderment is surely giving way after the 2019 re-election of the BJP into a sort of sobriety and a realization that they need to be careful and sort out their existential questions. So I think they're looking at very practical questions now of survival and representation and the economy, the informal economy being hit, sectorally, this not by design necessarily, but it just happens that a lot of the informal sector was where a lot of the poorer Muslims or the were seeking employment. That has been hit desperately. So I think there's a desperation to get that in order, but it is to survive and a firm belief that their ancestors are buried here and they're here to stay.
Well, one last question. In 2009, Mark Tully, the legendary and long-time BBC correspondent in India, picked out Ayodhya as the defining event of his long career because he said it destroyed something that was quintessentially Indian, the accommodating nature of Indians. Seema, I just want to know, is that how you look at this incident? And where does this story rank in your career?
Mark has actually said it all for me, as always. We're all deeply in awe of Mark, having worked in the BBC, and Mark is such a lodestar. Yeah, he's spot on. He's right. Ayodhya does for modern India, as in it really marks a break in Nehruvian India, and it marks the huge cracks which were to finally fell or threaten the foundations of the republic, because it links religion. It brings religion into the drawing room, into citizenship, into the front yard, into the government office. And a party or a ideology which is doing that does not get effectively defeated and pushed back at the hustings. So more than what the party is doing or what the slogans it is doing, the resonance and the response it gets from the Indian people, particularly in the past 6 years, I think that is something which is a true break in how people of my vintage, my experience, and my sensibility would define India. So yes, certainly Ayodhya is a huge watershed moment for India, and I don't think the full impact, the whole reckoning, is still not over.
So when it happened in 1992, they said India has changed. Could we say safely that when this foundation stone is laid, India would have changed forever and perhaps irretrievably?
I don't want to use words like irretrievably because, as we said, nobody could have imagined this happening when when Advani was arrested by Lalu in Samastipur during his Rath Yatra. So I don't know about irrevocably. So, but sure, India has changed, and I think more than that, it is kind of refurbishing its nameplate, its or the signboard is being painted up, and it is a truth which we've known that has been creeping up on us, and this is a way in which to kind of plant the flag and push it further in that direction.
Well, that's Seema Chishti, veteran broadcaster, journalist, and an eyewitness to the day India changed 28 Decembers ago. Thank you, Seema Aure, for sparing the time to walk down memory lane.
Tumba, thanks. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
The theme music for J-Pod was composed by me, Krishna Prasad, using GarageBand. You can follow Seema Chishti on Twitter at SeemaY. The clips of the Eyewitness show produced by HTV are reproduced here with the kind permission of Seema Chishti. And many thanks to the radio and TV anchor Vasanti Hariprakash for her support to the Net Paper. And thank you all for listening in.
Social media, a place where you get news, views, arguments, fun stuff, vicious rants, all of which can drive you insane. It's all so confusing. Don't you wish there was a way to cut through all the noise? Say hello to the Net Paper, a first of its kind newsletter, a digital newspaper in your inbox, one that gets you the news, the views, and the juice from Facebook and Twitter, TikTok and Instagram. If you wish to get the net paper in your email, do go to the netpaper.substack.com and hit subscribe. The Net Paper. All the juice that's fit to share.